Hey everyone, you're here with Mark on Perfect Gardens TV. So, got another great question. Do you need to flush outside in soil? The reason why I thought this was a great question is because we're always talking about flushing soil indoors. So, for outdoors, if you're growing in the ground and you are using a high salt base fertilizer, I would say that you need to flush your soil out in between grows. I would not flush your soil in the middle of your grow or toward the end of your grow to try to make your flower better smoke. At that point, the damage has already been done. And what I mean by that is if you've been on the channel, you've heard this before. And this is something I've learned over the years is we're always talking about what causes harsh smoke, right? And we talked about the chlorophyll, we talked about other things. But what I'm really starting to realize is it's the heavy metals and the things that the plants bioaccumulate and store in the trichomes. That's what ends up causing the harsh smoke. And when you want to flush your plants at the end of the grow, you're not going to be flushing those heavy metals out of the trichomes. The plants have already stored them in the oil, literally in the plant itself. So you're not going to be flushing it out anytime soon. So the only thing that the flushing is going to do is it's going to strip the soil of essential nutrients and fertilizer and enzymes that have been created already. And then your plant will begin to cannibalize itself sooner. And what will that do? Well, that could affect your yield. It could affect any additional potential that your plant could produce. It's going to start to get affected. The way how you solve all these things I talked about, the heavy metals accumulating, the harsh smoke, because ultimately that's why we're doing the flush. And also the reason why I tell you that you're going to want to flush your soil in between grows is because you do want to get those high salts out of that soil prior to replanting, because more than likely you're already hitting your toxicity levels in the salt-based fertilizer you're using it. So you want to kind of restart your soil. What we're discussing is soil in the ground, not in pots, right? It's a similar thought process, but we're talking specifically soil in the ground. Then at that point in between grows, you would flush your soil just to get those salts out and allow the new plants, the new clones or new seeds you put in for that soil to not be filled with too many toxins, which will end up causing a nutrient lockout. And I'm being very specific with my words, right? These toxic salt-based fertilizers, especially this year, what we've come to realize even further is that your plants can exist in really high parts per million. I'm talking about an EC of 24 when your soil biology and everything's going properly. But when you are using salt-based fertilizers, your plants are going to show toxicity levels anywhere between 1,800 to 3,000 parts per million. Versus when you're using soil biology and using drops balance and BAM and everything is working properly in your soil, you can have a liquid parts per million reading of between 12,000 to 16,000 parts per million. That translates into an EC of 24 EC or higher. And if you haven't seen those videos, highly recommend to do so. Here's a link to them. We'll also be bringing on Stig, the person that shot this video, a little later on in the next couple weeks after he finishes grow, so that we could talk about his results and his experience and everything that has happened. But getting back over to actually how to solve the problem, you've heard me talk about, you want to use drops of balance initially at a rate of 5 mLs per gallon. Treat your soil one time. Then every time after that, use it at a ratio of 1 ml per gallon, whether it's watering and feeding. And that's if you're using tap water or well water. If you're using RO water or distilled water, you want to use half the concentration, because at that point you don't need to clean the water. You're just remineralizing the water. Through the 2023 field study report, we showed that drops of balance actually locks up all the heavy metals and it converts all the pesticides, fungicides, insecticides back to undetectable levels. Then with the heavy metals, we showed that it actually locks up the heavy metals in the soil so the plant can never bioaccumulate it. By doing that, you are going to have incredibly clean smoke. I'm literally smoking a J right now, and I'm going to be interviewing this other grower very soon. He's a really high salt fertilizer guy, and he uses Drops Balance, and his smoke is so clean because the plant is not taking up any of the heavy metals that are in those salt fertilizer bottles, right? And he can go at a higher parts per million because he's converting those salts back to sulfated minerals and making it nutrient available very quickly, right? I'll be interviewing that guy coming up very soon so we can talk about salts, because ultimately the flush is for people that want cleaner smoke, but we got to understand what is causing the harsh smoke. And once we understand what's causing the harsh smoke, not just the chlorophyll, but the heavy metals, because the heavy metals also are bioaccumulate probably even in the leaf tissue itself. I don't know. I just know the majority of it bioaccumulates in the trichomes. So we have to understand what's actually causing the problem so that we don't implement things like flushing that cannibalize the plant and isn't as effective as you think it is, right? And so that's where it goes back to the Drops of Balance. You got to lock up the heavy metals in the soil, never allow the plant to bioaccumulate them into the trichomes. And by doing that, the need to flush will not exist, whether you're using biodynamics or you're using a salt-based fertilizer. Because if you're using Drops of Balance and using a salt-based fertilizer, even if you're using that outdoors, there's going to be no need to flush the salts out in between grows because Drops of Balance has already converted those incomplete chemical reactions that are in those liquid fertilizers back to sulfated minerals, which bacteria love sulfated minerals. And when you convert those salts back to sulfated minerals, then water can actually hold parts per million higher than the EC of 24 or higher than a parts per million, depending on whether you're using the 500 parts per million scale or the 700 parts per million scale. With biology, the water itself can hold a parts per million of between 10,000 and 16,000 parts per million of liquid nutrients without it interrupting the speed of the bacteria. Because like I've told you, if you're using synthetic fertilizer, and which when I say synthetic fertilizer, liquid fertilizer that has heavy metals, all of these things in these bottles actually show a toxicity level of around 800 parts per million. But then when you use the Drops Balance and you convert these salts over, or you use dry amendments and living soil, you allow the bacteria to break things down, they can exist with much higher, 10 times the amount of liquid nutrients than in synthetic fertilizer that has been made in the lab. Anyways, I hope this video was informational and challenges your thought process on what we've been taught in modern day farming. Have a great grow, everyone.